Morning, everyone. Once again, thank you, Sister Leslie, for holding up this side. That's right. Represent. Good to be with you. Looking forward to our class discussion. Going across the Bible timeline, we are in Numbers chapter 33, which will be paralleled with Exodus 16. We left off on one verse here, and Numbers 33:10, which gives us information not found in the book of Exodus. And so we are in the year 1446 BC. We are getting our travel itinerary courtesy of Dr. Glenn Fritz. And we've now moved on to his second book, The Exodus Mysteries, Midian, Sinai, and Jabal al-Lawz, which is the mountain range. So we'll be talking about that. So in this year, 1446 BC, Middle Bronze Age, 2A, getting ready for B. China's being led by Emperor Ren of the Shang Dynasty. The Pharaoh of Egypt, as far as Pharaoh and Egypt go, Egypt is now hiring. They lost their Pharaoh Dudamos II in the Exodus Sea crossing. And I was thinking about this as far as the timing of the next Pharaoh, who, as Egyptologist David Roll's new chronology points out, does come to the throne this very year, 1446 BC. And he does say it is very likely that Dudamos II was lost in the Exodus Sea crossing. So appreciate that coming from him. But I'm thinking about the timing. It took Israel, this new nation of Israel, 18 days to get from Egypt to the first side, the one side of the sea, and then they camped and then made it to the other side by day 20. With the chariots and all, it took the Egyptian army 14 days to get to the sea crossing. So it's going to take at least 14 days for news to. In fact, there's no one who survived to send news back. So when they're not hearing back, they're going to be sending folks over to see what's happening and realize it's all gone. We don't have a pharaoh anymore. And so it's probably going to be a couple of weeks before things settle and they get themselves a new pharaoh. So I kind of pushed the timing within the year of him to make sense and fit with that. So right now they don't have a pharaoh and they're waiting onward to hear back from him, who will not be returning. Over in Babylon, in Bible lands, we have Amiditana, king on the throne. He is Hammurbi's great-grandson. And with the Lord's people in the line of Christ, we have Aminadab, I'm thinking about 98 years old by now, and his son Nahshon, about 39 years old. He's the 28th generation of Adam, grandpa to Boaz, and he will be the one leading this tribe of Judah as they go. So this brings us to Numbers 33, verse 10. So a quick recap. They've launched out from the other side of here across the Wadi al-Hasha into the wilderness of Shur. Here's the mountain range of Shur. I was a little hesitant, but now I'm sure. Looking up here sideways, here's the north to the Dead Sea. Here's again the mountain range of Shur, the wilderness of Shur. Here's Nueba, where they went across, and we have the wilderness of Etham on both sides, capping around the top of the Gulf of Aqaba, the Yam Suf. And they're making their way down towards Midian over here. So there they are saying goodbye to the Exodus Sea as they move on ahead. They've gone up to the hill of Ashtaroth, come down to Al-Sharaf, and by day 3, made it over to Mara, where they didn't have water. And down from Mara, they made it to Al-Bad. Over here, Al-Bad would be the area in the Bible known as Elim. And here's where we get Numbers 33, verse 10, which tells us something not in the book of Exodus. In Numbers 33, verse 10, they journeyed from Elim, okay, this Al-Bad area here, they journeyed from Elim and camped by Boundary Sea. Oh, wait a minute, it's been over 3 days since they left the sea. How are they ending up back at the sea? Well, this only makes sense, number one, if the sea is the Gulf of Aqaba, and if they're following this route, going parallel along down the side of it. So let me just kind of show here, swing this around and zoom out a little bit. There we go. So here's the sea crossing. Here they are coming down, like I said, paralleling the Exodus Sea, the Boundary Sea, Yam Suf. So it makes sense that it would be physically possible for them to take a sidetrack over here and be at the sea again. That's what Numbers 33:10 tells us happened. The question is, why? because Moses is leading them to Mount Sinai, which Moses had been to before. He's taking them through Midian, where he lived before for 40 years. So if Moses is going to be taking them down the same route he had taken through Midian and around to the backside of Mount Sinai, why are they going here to the Red Sea, to the Gulf of Aqaba, the Yam Suf? Well, we left on this cliffhanger last week and talked about how at the time of the crossing here, the army of the Egyptians was drowned in the sea. They were buried in the sea. The waters overwhelmed. They sunk, scriptures describe. Okay, but then there's also a verse in the midst of that that talks about them seeing them dead on the seashore. Well, that sounds contradictory. Which is it? And the answer is yes. The Bible is true in both counts. Well, how does that work? If they sank here, how and where do they see them on the seashore? Now we're getting into some fun CSI stuff. What happens with bodies in water? So this is, of course, Dr. Glenn Pritz here. Check this out. A drowning victim whose lungs fill with water normally sinks immediately, which is why dragging with grappling hooks has been historically used for body recovery. Makes sense? In warm water, sunken victims may become floaters hours or days after drowning due to gaseous bloating in the abdomen and chest from bacterial putrefaction. Wow. Sounds about right. Yeah. Now, conversely, in cold water, putrefaction is hindered and the body may never resurface. Putrefaction is like food spoilage. Higher temperatures increase the bacterial colony proliferation rate. Ooh, that sounds fancy. Hey, good morning. Welcome, welcome. Oh, I'm sorry, that seat's taken. I'm kidding. How are you? Doing okay? You doing okay?
I'm doing okay.
Glad to hear it. All righty. So we are in Numbers 33, verse 10, talking about how they made it back to the sea after they'd been more than 3 days away from the sea, which also shows that this was not any water body close to Egypt, because the common thought is they crossed it once and moved on from it and left it way behind. Well, how do you factor Numbers 33:10 into that then if they're back at the sea again? That doesn't fit. That doesn't fit. So you have to throw that out if it doesn't fit the Bible. So we're talking CSI stuff and what happened with the Roman soldier bodies here, and how they were sunk at the time of the Exodus crossing. But then we're also told that the Israelites see them dead on the seashore. So talked about how bodies sink and need to be, when they fill with water, need to be, and we drag with hooks to try to pull them out. But in warmer waters, bacterial, putrefaction takes place, and the gases float up like a balloon, the bodies, and so the bodies float in the waters. This happens in warmer temperatures, but not so much in colder temperatures. So it makes sense. A little more fun science for us. Most deep bodies of water contain, new word for us today, thermoclines. What's that, a thermocline? That is the stratification or layers of water that are based on the temperature. So this layer's of temperature, that layer's of temperature. So when you've got deep bodies of water, the layers of the water are in different temperatures. And we're in Numbers 33:10, talking about how the Israelites somehow make it back to the Red Sea again after they've been over 3 days away from it. So we're talking about what happens with bodies in the water. So bodies in the water, they sink, they fill with, their lungs fill with water, they sink, and then depending on the temperature is warm enough, then the bacterial putrefaction happens and the gases build up, and so they fill up with air and the bodies float. And so that happens in warmer waters. But in deep waters, they've got temperature layers called thermoclines, fancy word. And so since cold water is denser, cold water sinks, leaving the warmest water at the surface and the coldest water near the bottom. We've experienced that. We've seen that. That makes sense with what we see. So if this Gulf of Aqaba here, this Exodus Sea crossing body of water here, if this body displayed those usual thermocline characteristics, then the bodies of the Egyptians would have been kept too cold to ever bloat and rise to the surface. Makes sense? However, the Gulf is unique in that it is a relatively warm sea with fairly uniform temperatures at all depths. The average water temperature of the upper 650 feet ranges from 70 to 79 degrees. So you have to go below 650 feet to get any different. Yeah. So below that, the water is homogeneous, the same during summer and winter, maintaining the winter temperatures that were encountered above. So in other words, any depth in the Gulf can be presumed to be at least 70 degrees. So at the seafloor of the Gulf of Aqaba, it's 70 degrees. Wow. That's a temperature that's suitable for putrefaction, which is just a fun word to say. Bacterial putrefaction. There we go. Get the whole concept there. And as a side note, the great depths in the Gulf, they actually go, here's another fun word, adiabatic heating, caused by the pressure of the overlying water. So basically, when you're that deep, the pressure of the water is a heat source. Just like pressure turns coal into a diamond. So that adds to the heat factor because when you're deeper, you've got more pressure. So, wow. So what's this have to do with the Bible here and these Roman soldiers? So the temperatures above that 650 feet be from 75.2 to 82.4 degrees, warm enough to cause a relatively rapid onset of our word putrefaction, bloating, and subsequent flotation. An additional buoyancy factor is the salinity, the salt content of the Gulf. This Gulf of Aqaba here is the highest in the world in salt content among the open seas. Yeah, I did not know that before this. So based on the dominant weather and Gulf conditions, corpses that surfaced were drift south. So check this out. So here's the crossing, and here's where they are going from Elim back to the sea again, and here's the drift factor. Based on the dominant weather and Gulf conditions, corpses that surfaced would drift south, coming ashore about 39 to 40 miles south of the sea crossing. This shoreline lies just north of the historic harbor town called Machna. We looked at pictures of it last week. So according to the route estimated here, the Hebrews reached this point after 77 miles of overland travel from here coming around to here, 77 miles. Perhaps a week after the Egyptian army was destroyed. So we're about day 27 now, if they landed on the other side on day 20. Some of the weapons may have come ashore attached to floating debris, while others would have been attached to bodies. Metallic parts of harnesses, saddles, chariots would also have been salvaged by the Hebrews. Given the size of the Egyptian force, the potential magnitude of this plunder is difficult to imagine. Remember, when they left, they didn't have a sword, yet they later fight the Amalekites with swords. Where'd they get them? Ta-da! So the bodies weren't on the seashore here, they sunk, but then they later putrefaction, bloated and floated, and now they wash up on the seashore here. So they go down and plunder them.
So
yeah,
the Israel, they would have to know all that was going to happen. Well, to make that intentional detour. Was it intentional?
Or, great question. So did the Israelites know all this CSI science and stuff? And was this intentional? The traveling here was intentional, but whose intention? Keep in mind, they are still being led by the pillar of fire and cloud. And so Dr. Fritz estimates here, and it makes sense to me, that at the camp there at Elim, at Al-Bad, that some of them went over to here, and then came back, but not all of them. So enough to go check it out and plunder. So they were drawn to this, and they were able to see the results here, and then take the plunder and bring it back to the camp. And so, God, of course, was in control. They didn't have to know these signs or expect that this would happen, but God was the one leading them, and God knew, of course, and he's the one who led them to this. And so to their great benefit. Moses, remember, said in Exodus 14:7 and 9, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over every one of them. So that's a lot. Josephus, Jewish historian, he records 600 chariots, 50,000 horsemen, 200,000 footmen, all armed. Remember, they're chasing the Israelites, which are 2.5 million, half of which are, the men and all, 600,000 men and all that. So this is a big deal. So there's a lot happening here. Now, I'm sure some stayed sunk, others came down floating, but there's obviously sizable enough for them to be able to get enough weapons to later use to fight the Amalekites and on from there. So the discovery of this wreckage, to Brother Clay's point, would have precipitated or come before their movement to the seaside. So as they're coming down, what's going on over here? As the Lord's pointing them and leading them. So they check it out, and good fortune for them, they get tons of valuable armaments, harnesses, utensils, tools, metallic objects, without having to have taken them around these 77 miles. It's like, go ahead, send the luggage on down here. We'll pick it up later, kind of thing. Pretty convenient. And while they're going up and down and all that stuff, here we mentioned still a couple thousand feet high and then coming back down. So they didn't have to do that lugging all this metal stuff. So that's pretty cool. In fact, Josephus says this was divine providence. This was God's provision. No two ways about it. So here's a photograph of looking from the north going south. The bodies would have drifted and come ashore up in that area here, and that town of Machna is just a little further that way. So this is the coast of the Egyptian army wreckage. So we're looking south along the eastern Gulf of Aqaba. It's a light brown sandy coast beyond the dark mountains. So Machna, again, a little further in the distance, top right. Much of the Egyptian wreckage likely accumulated on this distant sandy shoreline where it was able to be readily recovered by the Hebrews. So pretty cool. So kind of summing this up. So after crossing the sea, spending 3 days in the waterless wilderness of Shur, the Hebrews arrived in Marah, covering a distance of 34 miles. So this is what we were looking at going across the map there. From Marah, they continued southward downhill in the Wadi al-Ifal. About 2 days, 24 miles of travel. They arrive at Al-Bad, which is in the Bible as Elim. And so over 2,000 years later, this same route is traveled by Muslims going on their pilgrimage to Mecca. It's called the Hajj route. So a well-known travel route here. So down here in the lower part of Al-Bad, Elim, they encountered this whole district that was blessed with springs and vegetation. The Bible describes 12 springs and 70 palms. So this is Elim, the beginning of the area of Elim. And the wadi, well, wadi is like a valley, oftentimes with a stream or a brook that comes or goes based on the precipitation and the temperatures. Goes on southwest towards the sea, so they could have a continued area here of water and grazing sources in this big area of Elim. Now, continuing here to the sea, to Yam Suf, this is 19 miles away from the camp at Elim. So it's kind of a mystery. Why would they be doing this? What would they be gaining from that? Let's see, let me do something real quick here. There we go. Because it's this, like we said, it's off the beaten path. This is not, it's a dead end, and it's not on the way to Mount Sinai, where Moses has been and where Moses is taking them. And there's limited water on those 19 miles. So why would they be doing it? Maybe going to, because Machna is a nice place, got some resources. But no, it makes sense when we add in Numbers 33, verse 10. They're coming here because we see these Gulf conditions favor the Egyptian army's remains and materials being deposited here. So they have this opportunity to pillage those remains, which is actually the second time they plundered the Egyptians. Because when they left, we're told in Exodus 12, 35 and 36, the children of Israel asked from the Egyptians articles of silver, gold, clothing. The Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. So they granted them what they requested. So they plundered the Egyptians. At that point, they were so beat down, take it, just go. You and your God, just go. And so the Lord is equipping and supplying his people here. So any other reactions, thoughts, or questions on the second funding of the Egyptian army and all the cool science and about bacterial putrefaction and all this stuff, and how likely this scenario is given all the facts about the Gulf here, how it would be providing for this to happen. And of course, the Lord's awareness and timing and provision as well. Any reactions, thoughts, questions? All good. They get to do their laundry, yeah. Well, hello. Hello. Oh, does my heart good to see y'all. So they go the 19 miles down to do this, and then they come back the 19 miles. So we're probably on day 29 now, which would be the 13th day of the second month, Iyar in the Hebrew calendar. For us, about Thursday, May 21st, 1446 BC. So now we are moving on in the Bible to the wilderness of sin. Doesn't that just sound horrible? It's not sin like we're thinking. So here they're coming down. Here's the area of Elim. Here's the detour over here to the camp by Makla, where they plundered the bodies that remained. So they come the 19 miles back, and now they're coming down here into the wilderness of sin. And this is going to be the Midian area where Moses spent 40 years. And they're going to come back through here and go around the back to Mount Sinai. So we'll look at all of that. So the wilderness of sin, very next verse, Numbers 33:11. They journeyed from Boundary Sea and camped in the wilderness of sin. So they came back from here, camped in the wilderness of sin. We can tie this in with Exodus chapter 16, verse 1. Exodus 16, verse 1. Then they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. So here's Elim, Mount Sinai is over here. So this wilderness of sin is in between them on their journey here. Notice again, Exodus 16:1 doesn't mention the detour to the Yam Suf. We put all the Bible together to get the whole story. So getting into the wilderness of sin here, about 18 miles from Elim or 76 miles from the original sea crossing. They're going about 7.5 miles a day now. So this wilderness of sin here that we just read about in the Bible, it's on the only route that's between Elim and Sinai that would be suited for the multitude. Keep in mind, we've got 2.5 million folks here, about 600,000 men plus women and children and animals and wagons and all that stuff. So sin, it's not sin like we think of sin in current times, our English word. These sin-based words in Arabic, Latin, and Greek, and Hebrew, they all denote something that is far to the east. The Chinese-Japanese war is called the Sino-Japanese War, because when we think Far East, the word sin actually refers to that. It's compass direction. So based on the word usage, etymology is the fancy word, which I get a kick out of that fancy word because it's very close to another fancy word, entomology, which is the study of bugs. Yeah. So the study of words and the study of bugs, they're really funny words. Anyway, so looking at the word for wilderness of sin, it literally means wilderness of east. Or eastern wilderness. Okay, east of what? East of the sea that they crossed. Well, sure enough, it is to the east of the Gulf of Aqaba, the Exodus Sea crossing. It all fits. And the Gulf of Aqaba used to be their eastern landmark. Now they're going further. So this means the wilderness of sin would be here on the Arabian side of the Gulf of Aqaba, the Yam Suf, and that coincides with the fact Elim and the wilderness of sin are both somewhat adjacent to the Yam Suf encampment here. They're nearby. They're not farther inland, further from the shore of the Gulf. They're all kind of right here, which fits. So this valley that they're traveling down, this Wadi al-Ifal, means valley of the groove or the rupture. It's a major drainage basin. So there are many little wadis that feed into this. So in the wet years, and in the seasons, this part of the wadi here would be expected to provide enhanced water and grazing resources. Keep in mind, they're traveling in the spring. And so this is, again, March and April timeframe here we're looking at. But in the present day, this Ifal triangle here, this is today barren and a sandy plain and doesn't have much vegetation anymore. But as recently as 700, the year 700 AD, this plain here was actually covered with thickets and palms. We've got documents of this, but possibly mentioned in the Muslim scriptures, the Quran, describing this area in the woods of Ica that where they encamped, and how there was more vegetation here back in the day. But since the year 700 and on from there, it's gone away. So if we assume they crossed the Red Sea, the Yam Suf, within 20 days of leaving Egypt, that leaves about 10 days to reach the wilderness of Sin. So looks like we're about here, about 18 miles south of Elim, Baghdad. Moses, again, speaking in broad terms, and so referring to big areas. The Hebrew route that they took, again, being led by God, probably followed these low-lying wadi beds where there'd be more water and fodder for the animals. And so we've got a couple of areas down here where there's some of that now. As they're making their way down towards the shoreline, they're going to hug it and go across off from here. So far, so good. Well, there's nothing to complain about then, right? Well, we know people, and the Lord's people especially, so not so. So let's read verse 16, chapter 16, verse 1 again says, they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. This was on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. They left Egypt on the 15th day of the first month. The 14th was the Passover. And so the 15th was the next day and they left. So this is a month since they left. So with the travel we've seen, that fits. That's not a big stretch. It's not cramming anything into too little or stretching out too far. This seems natural and fits that they would arrive here in this wilderness of Sin by day 30, 1 month since they left. So far, so good, right? Well, let's read two more verses. Exodus 16, 2 and 3. But the whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The sons of Israel said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread until we were full. For you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this entire assembly with hunger. Kids ever say, I'm starving. I'm going to die. I need to eat. I need to. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're saying it would have been better if the Lord killed us right after we ate, when we were fat, dumb, and happy with pots of meat and all that stuff. Yeah, we have such a great meal. You're so full, like I could die happy right now. That's how their minds are nostalgizing their look back at Egypt. If 30 days ago, it wasn't so pleasant in Egypt, of course. But, whenever you're not happy in the present, the past suddenly looks a lot better, right? Just like grass is greener on the other side, we do the same thing, kind of romanticize the past. And so that's what they're doing here. Well, what's the problem? Why are they hungry? Well, again, thoughts from Dr. Fritz here. According to these verses, the Hebrews moved from Yam Suf and Elim into this wilderness of Sin, entering it 1 month after their departure from Egypt. At that time, the multitude complained grievously and wished to return to Egypt. Their unleavened dough supplies. Remember, they left with unleavened dough because they left in hurry and haste and didn't have time to bake it and to put yeast in it for yeast to rise. And so their unleavened dough supplies were likely gone. Josephus states that those supplies lasted 30 days. Here we are after 30 days now, it's gone. So now they're subsiding on milk and meat from their herds and perhaps some scantily edible plant finds. So now they're losing part of their flock and their subsistence as they are having to live off of that. And so they're a little nervous here. So what happens? We continue on with verse 4. Exodus 16:4. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you. And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, so that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my instruction. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, at evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your grumblings against the Lord. And what are we that you grumble against us? Elton John had an album that came out called Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player. It's the one that had Crocodile Rock and other good stuff on it. The idea here, don't shoot me, I'm only the messenger. So Moses and Aaron are saying, God's the one in control here, and he knows your needs. He's got you covered. Don't worry or panic, and don't take it out on us. We're not your enemy. We're not the problem. And if you don't like the message, take it up with the source of the message, not the messenger. Yeah, the messengers are responsible for how they deliver the message. We get that. So they're told that the Lord knows, he hears you, he's got you covered. Guess he's going to do something here. Stay tuned. And by the way, what he provides, there's going to be double on the 6th day because there ain't going to be any on the 7th. And so we'll take a look at that. So let's continue on. Everyone good with that so far? All right, let's continue a couple more verses. Pick up in verse, let's see. And Moses said, this will happen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread to the full in the morning. For the Lord hears your grumblings, which you grumble against him. And what are we? Your grumblings are not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, come forward before the Lord, for he has heard your grumblings. And it came about, as Aaron spoke to the entire congregation of the sons of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the grumblings of the sons of Israel. Speak to them, saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So it came about at evening that the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. And we'll pause right here. So not only was, and we're going to see this is the manna, not only is this bread from heaven provided in the morning, but they're also given meat at night from these quails. Well, what are quails doing over here? Well, let's have some fun science and observations of nature again. This is a migration pattern for birds. You know, swallows come back to Capistrano for us in California here, and the birds, migrating south in the winters and all that stuff. So here we see in the spring coming back from the south, going up to the north. Notice there's kind of a bottleneck right here. Well, this is the Mediterranean Sea, and here we are on the Sinai Peninsula right here, and that little red there, that's where we are right now in the wilderness of sin. So we've got all this migration pattern of birds coming right to the bottlenecking right here. So again, the wilderness of sin being near the sea, Josephus touches on this. He says, thou didst preserve our life with quails, food from the sea. So the quail are coming over the sea from the land of Africa and coming over to this area. So here's the story here. It turns out many birds migrate north from Africa to Europe in the spring, following the west coast of the Red Sea. Now, this map is based on raptor, not dinosaur, but bird, raptor large bird migrations that have been studied more extensively than quail, but quail likely follow this same migration scheme based on direct and indirect evidence we have in the literature on all this stuff. So notice there's an hourglass shaping, narrowing of the migration pattern right here at the northern Red Sea. I keep pointing to my screen here when you're looking up there. Anyway, yep. Funny. Anyway, so the migration concentration has made, so this hour, let me back up. This hourglass narrowing of the migration in the northern Red Sea, right here near the wilderness of sin. This migration concentration has made seasonal bird watching popular at an area here called Ras Muhammad, of course, a high point named after Muhammad, at the tip of the Sinai Peninsula, and over at Eilat at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba. So bird watchers come here because they know about this. So this constriction of their flight path here occurs because the birds are seeking landfall immediately after crossing the head of the Red Sea to rest and refuel. And the Sinai Peninsula here and Northwest Arabian Peninsula happen to be the closest shores. So at that time, the bird's exhaustion temporarily makes them easy prey, which explains the Bible scenario here in the wilderness of sin. The timing of these migrations correlates with this part of the Exodus. At the peak of a spring quail migration in the Mediterranean region occurs late March or early April, the time frame we're looking at here. So this is something that's part of natural ecology and ecosystem that happens here, but still God's miraculous provision of the timing and the coming together of these things. As I mentioned before, there are basically two categories of miracles that are described. There are constellation and violation miracles. The violation miracles, the ones we're most familiar with, tend to violate the laws of nature. Well, God's not really violating anything. He's God. He invented the laws of nature. He's overriding them and superseding them, which he has authority to do. And so those are the kinds we're most familiar with. The parting of the Exodus Sea, that's a violation or an overriding miracle. The other type of miracle is a constellation miracle. Like a constellation is the coming together of the stars. Well, a constellation of all these different factors at just the right place, at just the right time, or how, as we talk about on Wednesdays, how much can we say is coincidence? Oh, that's a coincidence. Oh, that's a coincidence. Really? How long are we going to keep saying that until we realize, okay, there's a bigger picture here, the timing and putting of all this together. And when we talk about the movement of things in nature and planets and stars, that had to be set in motion from the beginning for it to line up and happen and coordinate at the right times that it does. So that's intelligent design. That's the miracle of God's constellation putting these things together. So even though there are some natural occurrences, it was a divine hand that put them together. So does that make sense? Yeah, cool. So the whole point of that, seeing natural things take place doesn't take it out of God's hands. In fact, God's the one who, it was God's hands who put that in motion. So cool. So let's talk about this manna here with the time we have left for our adult Sunday school class here. Continuing on, Exodus 16, 14, and 15. Let's see. Exodus 16, 14. When the layer of dew evaporated, behold, on the surface of the wilderness, there was a fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. When the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, it is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. Now pause right there, skip down to verse 31. And the house of Israel named the bread manna. And it was like coriander seed, white, and its taste was like wafers with honey. So in verse 15, they're asking, what is it? And in verse 31, they call it manna. Manna is Hebrew for, what is it? So they actually call it, I remember when I was a teenager, the candy bar came out, whatchamacallit, which I really enjoyed. Yeah, I remember those. So here they call this manna, that's what is it? Well, that's the name they slap on it. The Hebrew word manna is, what is it? Hey, go ahead and get some more of that, what is it? And so that what's it stuff, yeah, that's what it is. But now, let's take a spiritual perspective here. Hold your place in Exodus 16. Jesus talks about this, and this is a very important passage and a good place for us to bring it to. John chapter 6. Because everything God does is intentional. It's with a purpose. Like an artist or a writer, every stroke, every word is intentional. There's a reason this word or this stroke was done and not another. So what the Lord is doing with provision of the manna is intentional. What was his point here? Well, we're given an explanation of it by Jesus in John chapter 6. John chapter 6, we're going to pick up in verse 31. I'm going to read through a fair amount of section here because it's a big picture here that explains it. So John 6, verse 31. They say to him, our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread out of heaven to eat. Jesus then said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread out of heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread out of heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down out of heaven and gives life to the world. Then they said to him, Lord, always give us this bread. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. The one who comes to me will not be hungry, and the one who believes in me will never be thirsty. But I said to you that you have indeed seen me, and yet you do not believe. Everything that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me, I will certainly not cast out. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that of everything that he has given me, I will lose nothing, but will raise it up on the last day. For this is the will of my Father, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him will have eternal life, and I myself will raise him up on the last day. So the Jews were complaining about him because he said, I am the bread that came down out of heaven. And they were saying, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does he now say, I have come down out of heaven? Jesus answered and said to them, stop complaining among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught of God. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father, except the one who is from God. He has seen the Father. Truly, truly, I say to you, the one who believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down out of heaven, so that anyone may eat from it and not die. I am the living bread that came down out of heaven. If anyone eats from this bread, he will live forever. And the bread which I will give for the life of the world also is my flesh. So that's pretty big. That's pretty powerful. So what God was doing, God the Father was doing 1400 years before Jesus was on the scene in the flesh, was a picture pointing to his faithful provision as Jehovah Jireh, God their provider, but also pointing to the fact that that was a temporary fulfillment. There'd be an ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ. He embodied, he personified, he lived out and carried out everything that things in the Old Testament were pointing to. It was all pointing to the Messiah. It was all pointing to the Christ, to Jesus. And Jesus came to be the ultimate fulfillment of this. He satisfied and fulfilled the law of Moses that no one in their flesh was capable of doing. He accomplishes for us. He was our substitute. He gives his life in our place so that we who deserve death are freed from death by what he provided for us. And as we continue to live and partake of him, he is our sustenance. He is our provision. He is our nourishment. And the life that he nourishes, we know these bodies are going to get older and sicker. Exactly. We know that's why evolution is so stupid, because evolution is about things naturally getting better. Look around. Nothing gets naturally better. Everything gets naturally worse. So evolution on the surface, right off there is a joke, plus all the science shows it. So this body is falling apart, but we're given a promise of this corruption putting on incorruption, this mortality putting on immortality, because Jesus is the first fruits of that resurrection. The last enemy conquered is death. He is that victory over death through his body in our place. And so now we can look forward to a glorified body to trade this one out and trade on up. We can look forward to the fact that we are eternal beings. We're all going to spend eternity somewhere. And so it's a matter of where and what quality of life. And so Jesus is the bread of life that is not only our salvation from hell and the forgiveness of our sins, but he's also the bread of life that is the nourishment for our spirit as we look forward to and we try to be preparing ourselves for his coming and for that eternity. So the point from the beginning, God doesn't change. Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. His point was, I am here. I see you. I will provide for you. Stick with me, follow me, and I'll have you covered. And this is why Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God. Father knows you need all these things, just like all the other nations do. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all that you need, it will be provided for you. Doesn't mean we don't have to work for it, but he provides the opportunities for us to be able to do that. And so there's God's faithfulness, his consistency, his love and care for us, even though we don't always see it. And when we don't see it, we complain because we're not seeing it. He's gracious and merciful and faithful and is there for us to always be looking back to and coming to. So reactions, thoughts, comments, questions on John 6, connecting with the manna in the wilderness. Oh, yeah.
What do? They look for for forage to eat.
Yeah,
All day long, in the day. And God provides it.
absolutely. Scriptures even say in the Psalms how the animals look to God for their food. I love the fact when it talks about God using the animals to provide food for the prophet Elijah when he's on the run. He said, it says God commanded the ravens to go bring food to Elijah. And I've shared this before. I have this imagery in my head that I can just picture this. A couple of ravens just flying along, doing their raven thing. Hey, Joe, what's happening? Sorry, Joe. Hey, Joe, what's happening? Not much, Bob. What's going on? All of a sudden, ding, ding, wait a minute. God's telling me something. Sorry, Joe, I got to go take care of Elijah over here. I'll catch up with you later. I mean, it may sound silly, but really that's what's happening. God is commanding, and it's instinctive. It's natural. We can learn something from nature in the animal kingdom. It's a little more in tune than we are. We're sin corrupted and we've kind of fallen out of touch. But yeah, so a beautiful faithfulness that even the animals know to look to God for their provision. Absolutely. So yeah, good stuff. So we will pick this up. There's actually another verse in 1 Corinthians 10 that talks about this, and 2 Corinthians 8 that talks about this stuff as well. So we will pick up back in Exodus 16 next week with the Lord's provision, and going on from here, from the wilderness of sin that is east and not evil, the wilderness of the east, making their way towards Mount Sinai. So we're going to stop our screen share for now and stop our recording and get ready to go before the Lord in song.